I used to think the worst nightmare of my life would be hearing glass shatter in the middle of the night. I was wrong. The real nightmare was watching the HOA president calmly use a choose unfamiliar key to unlock my front door, as if my house were her personal property. The door trembled slightly. No force, no urgency, just a confident, practiced motion. The kind made by someone who believes they have the right to walk anywhere they please. I stood frozen in the kitchen, still holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold long ago. On the front door camera screen, the woman appeared with terrifying clarity. A cream-colored suit, blonde hair styled into a flawless, immovable shape. In her hand, a clipboard. That small symbol of authority the entire neighborhood had learned to fear. Brenda Halston, HOA president of Larkspur Ridge. A textbook Karen. And if you have ever read Karen stories or HOA stories on a Reddit story thread, you know exactly the kind of person I mean. She tried turning the key. The door did not open. 1 second. 2 seconds. She frowned. I saw her lips press together as the familiar fake smile vanished in an instant. Then she stepped back, staring straight into the camera, as if she knew someone was watching. There was no confusion in her eyes. They were cold, calculating, and defiant. Like a promise. I shut off the screen. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like the entire house could hear it. But to understand why that moment was so terrifying, I have to go back to the night before, to where everything truly began. The Larkspur Ridge Community Clubhouse always smelled like stale coffee and cheap plastic. The pale beige walls, windowless and dull, felt designed to swallow good ideas and spit out compromise. I sat on a flimsy metal chair that groaned every time I shifted, as if protesting my existence. My wife Maya sat beside me. She was not looking at the podium. Her fingers drifted across her phone screen, a habit from years working in cybersecurity. I knew she was checking our home cameras, like she always did. Neither of us wanted to be there. But if you skip HOA meetings, you quickly learn the price of absence. And tonight, something felt different. Brenda stood at the podium. The microphone made a dry clicking sound as she tapped it lightly, signaling for silence. And the room obeyed. The silence of people long accustomed to being controlled. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice sweet in a synthetic, sugary way. "The board has a new initiative to enhance community safety and protect property values." I leaned toward Maya and whispered that here it comes. She gave a faint smirk without lifting her eyes from the screen. Brenda raised her clipboard as if it were a sacred document. A new bylaw. Routine garage inspections. Once per quarter, a board representative would enter each garage. No clutter. No unauthorized modifications. No undeclared business activity. The room stirred. A few people lowered their heads. Others stared at their shoes. Fear spread like a cold draft. I felt something heat up in my chest. Slowly, dangerously, I stood up before I could stop myself. The metal chair screeched loudly. Brenda looked straight at me. Her smile tightened. She knew exactly who I was. Ethan Cole, the carpenter in the corner house. The man once fined for painting his front door the wrong shade. Someone she believed was easy to break. "I have a comment," I said. My voice echoed in the cramped room. "No, you will not be entering my garage. Not today. Not ever." The air froze. Brenda blinked. "If you have nothing to hide," she replied, her voice turning cold, "then you have nothing to fear." That line. That cheap, tired line. It hit something deep inside me. I looked straight at her. I spoke about privacy, about boundaries. I called her a petty tyrant, building a kingdom out of her neighbor's fear. The vote happened quickly. The rule passed. Brenda gathered her papers and glanced at me from across the room. That look said I had just signed an invisible sentence. On the way home, Maya squeezed my hand. She said softly that we needed to be careful from now on. I nodded. I knew I had just been underestimated. A stubborn carpenter standing up to the HOA, A background character in a typical HOA Karen story. They did not know who I really was. And they had no idea that when someone tried to open my front door with a stolen key, I was not just going to close it again. I was going to change the entire game. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that someone was standing right behind me. There was no sound, no clear sign, just an invisible pressure pressing against the back of my neck, forcing me to spin around on instinct. The bedroom was empty. Maya was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady, but the feeling did not go away. It clung to me all day like a shadow. The silence began immediately after the HOA meeting. A strange kind of silence. Not peaceful, but the kind that comes before a storm. The neighborhood streets looked cleaner than usual. Morning chatter was gone. Doors closed earlier. People glanced at each other, then quickly looked away. I knew this feeling. It was exactly like the air before a surprise inspection, when an entire neighborhood holds its breath, waiting to see whose name will be called. That afternoon, a package was marked as delivered. I stood on the porch, staring at the empty spot where it should have been. Nothing. I checked the cameras. The delivery driver placed the package down and left. 10 minutes later, a shadow slid across the edge of the frame. The package disappeared. No face, no hands, just a cleanly created absence. That evening, the newspaper I still made a habit of reading every morning was stuffed into the bushes, soaked with night dew. A small thing, but small things, when stacked together, form a very clear message. I was being targeted. Maya realized it before I fully did. She sat in the living room with her laptop open, a pale blue glow reflecting off her usually calm face. "They are playing an erosion game," she said quietly. "This is the exact tactic you see in so many HOA stories and Karen stories on Reddit story threads. No direct attack, just making sure you never feel safe." She pulled up camera data from the last 3 days. The footage sped by. Familiar cars passed through the frame. Then I saw it. The glossy white SUV. Brenda's car. It drove past my house far more often than necessary. Some days 4 times. Some days 6 times. Once, it parked at the end of the street, engine off. Sitting there for a long time before finally leaving, I let out a dry laugh. So I am not crazy. Maya did not smile. She zoomed in on another clip. A strange man, walking slowly past the side of the house. He did not look at the front door. He did not look at the cameras. His eyes were fixed on the electric meter and the pipes running along the wall. He paused for a few seconds, long enough to observe. Then he walked away as if nothing had happened. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly remembered something I had forgotten. A few weeks earlier, when we replaced the heating system, the contractors had hung a small lockbox on the pipe with a spare key inside. They said they would come back to retrieve it. They never did. Life got busy, and I pushed it out of my mind. I stood up fast, my heart pounding. Maya looked at me, and she understood before I could speak. I grabbed a flashlight, opened the side door, and stepped into the dark yard. The night was so quiet I could hear my shoes hitting the concrete. The lockbox was still there, hanging in place. I opened it using the old code. The lid popped open with a light click. Inside was empty. The key was gone. On the metal surface, there was a faint pry mark. Clumsy but unmistakable. I stood there for several seconds, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Every piece fell into place. This was not intimidation. This was preparation. Brenda did not do her dirty work herself. She hired someone, watched, took the key, copied it, tested it. I thought about the image of her standing at my front door the night before, calmly turning the key as if she had done it many times. I went back inside. "She has a key," I said. My voice was rough with anger. Maya was already at the main computer. She opened the smart lock access log. A list appeared. One entry from yesterday afternoon made my breath stop. A manual key entry attempt. Failed. The copy was not precise, Maya said, but I heard the tension in her voice. Or the person who made it was careless. But now she knows. And she will try again. There was no relief. Only a raw truth. The HOA president, the most powerful Karen in the neighborhood, had stood at my front door with a stolen key, and she would be back. I looked around the house I had repaired with my own hands, room by room. The place I once believed was a fortress. In Maya's eyes, I did not see fear. I saw something else. The cold focus of someone who had entered strategic mode. They thought I was just a carpenter pushing back against the HOA, a weak character in a familiar HOA Karen story. They did not know that I understood the value of territory. And they had no idea that my wife was not just someone behind a keyboard. She was someone who knew how to turn data into a weapon. That night, we did not change the locks. We did not turn on the porch lights. We left everything exactly as it was, not out of carelessness, but because the moment the key disappeared, the rules of the game changed. And this time, we were not just going to defend. We were going to let the intruder step into the light. I realized I had underestimated that moment until Maya said something that made the entire room fall silent. If she tried the door once, she said slowly, then that was not the last time. The sentence landed like a hammer strike. No shouting, no explanation. It cut straight to the truth. I looked at the front door, the thick slab of wood I had once been proud to install with my own hands. Now, it was no longer a symbol of safety. It was an invitation. Maya turned the screen toward me. On it was the smart lock activity log. Lines of emotionless text that felt heavy as stone. One manual key, entry attempt, failed. No alarm, no police. Just a cold record proving that someone had stood there, holding our key, trying to step into my family's private life. In my mind, I saw Brenda Halston at the HOA meeting. The fake smile. The familiar line, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. It was no longer moral advice. It was a threat. We could have changed the locks immediately. One phone call, 1 hour. Everything would be safe again. That is what an ordinary carpenter would do. Someone underestimated. Someone who only knows how to defend. But Maya is not that kind of person, and neither am I. She stood up and walked a slow circle around the living room, her eyes sharp, as if measuring every corner. Changing the locks is the natural reaction, she said. And that is exactly what she expects. If we change them, she will know she has been discovered. She will retreat, and we will never be able to prove what she did. I stayed silent. I understood. I hated it. But I understood. Do you want to win one round? Maya continued, her voice lower. Or do you want to end this war? I thought about the bowed heads in the HOA meeting room, the neighbors living in fear of a fine notice. I thought about the stolen key, about the unfamiliar hand that had touched my property. I did not just want to win. I wanted to dismantle. So what is the plan? I asked. Maya smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who could already see the entire board. We let her think she can still get in, she said. We let her take the next step, but next time, she will not leave in silence. We started that very night. No panic. No confusion. Everything moved with cold focus. I opened my laptop and searched for legal deterrents. Non-injurious. No dangerous traps. I did not want anyone hurt. I wanted a sign, a mark that could not be denied. I found it in a technical document used by banks. Industrial marking dye. Non-toxic. No burns. But stubborn. Extremely stubborn. The kind that stays no matter how much you scrub, long enough for everyone to see. I sent the link to Maya. She scanned it, then nodded. Perfect, she said. No attack, just exposure. While I placed the order, Maya shifted to another front. She opened the camera system map. Wires appeared like a spider web. If she dares to try again, Maya said, then she will learn what it feels like to be watched. She planned additional angles. One low, one tilted, one that anyone crossing the threshold would never think to look for. She talked about time synchronization, independent storage, about making sure a single power outage would never blind us. I listened and suddenly understood what Brenda and the entire HOA board had never grasped. They thought I was just a carpenter. They thought my wife was a woman working from home on a computer. They did not know I had built things designed to stand through storms. And they had no idea Maya had spent her entire career defending systems against the smartest intruders there are. When the die shipment was confirmed, I stood in the garage, looking at my familiar tools. The hammer, the drill, the things that had been with me for years. I was no longer angry. The anger had transformed into something else. Resolve. That night, we did not talk much. We just worked. I measured. Maya documented. Sometimes our eyes met. No words needed. There was fear, yes, but beneath it ran something stronger. A sense of control. A sense of reclaiming territory. When everything was temporarily finished, I stood in front of the door and placed my hand on the lock. It was unchanged, not replaced, not repaired. An invisible trap for someone who believed they held power. I turned off the porch light. Darkness settled in. And in that darkness, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The next time someone used that stolen key, they would not just open my front door. They would open the truth about themselves. I almost dropped the bucket when I heard a soft metallic click at the top of the door frame. The sound was so faint that if I had not been wound tight as a wire, I would have missed it. But I froze, because I knew that sound. It was the sound of a trap finding its perfect position. The garage turned into a workshop overnight. The smell of freshly cut wood mixed with cold metal. Fluorescent light poured straight down onto the workbench, where I laid out items that looked completely unrelated. A clear plastic bucket, fishing line thin as thread, a spring, a metal pin, a bottle of dark cobalt dye. Silent and heavy, like it was waiting. I worked slowly, carefully. Every movement had a purpose. I was not building a trap to hurt anyone. I was building a door that could speak, a door that would tell the story exactly as it happened. No exaggeration, no argument. Maya stood at the garage doorway with her arms crossed, watching. Her gaze never wavered. "Do not let it tip too early," she said. "The threshold is the boundary. Anyone who crosses it accepts responsibility." I nodded. I understood. Boundaries were the one thing Brenda always tried to erase. Today, we were rebuilding them with physics. The small shelf was mounted just inside the door frame, high enough that anyone opening the door would never see it. I tested the spring. Light, fast, decisive. The fishing line stretched across the floor, low enough that only a confident step would catch it. I stepped back and imagined someone entering without permission, without knocking, as if it were their unquestioned right. "Perfect," Maya said. She turned and walked into the living room, where another battlefield was being assembled. Screens lit up. A layout of the house appeared. Bright dots marked the existing cameras. Maya added more. One low to the ground, where people forget that eyes can exist. One angled from the flower bed, disguised inside a fake solar light. One high above, completely visible, like a warning. "We need every angle," she said. "If anyone dares to step inside, I want to see their face and the decision in their eyes." She synchronized the timestamps. She configured storage. She made sure that even if the power went out, even if the network faltered, the data would still flow to a safe place. Watching her work, I suddenly understood what the HOA board had never realized. They thought power lived in fines, in signatures, in endless meetings. They did not know that real power lives in preparation, When I mounted the sign beside the door, my hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the finality of it. Private property. No trespassing. All unlawful entries recorded. Non-lethal deterrence in use. Each word felt like an oath. "It is ugly," I said, half joking. "Yes," Maya replied, but no one can say they did not see it. We stepped back and looked at the door from a distance. It looked the same as always. No new lock, no added hardware, no sign of a trap, just an ordinary door. To anyone who believed they were entitled to walk through it. The first night passed without incident. I lay in bed with my eyes open, listening to every small sound. Wind slipping through the cracks, the heating system clicking on and off. Maya placed her hand on my chest. My heartbeat slowly settled. On the second night, I began to doubt myself. Maybe Brenda had backed off. Maybe she realized she had gone too far. Part of me wanted that, wanted everything to end right there. But Maya never believes in easy endings. She checked the fishing line every morning. She reviewed the footage every night. Predators always come back, she said. It is just a matter of time. By the third day, the waiting grew heavy. I moved in and out of the house, feeling like I was living inside a room filled with invisible landmines. But within that tension, something else was growing. Control. I was no longer being dragged along. I was the one who had set the board. When I turned off the porch light that evening, I paused for a moment at the door. I placed my hand on the wood. I thought about the neighbors who had learned to keep their heads down. I thought about Brenda, about the way she stepped into other people's spaces without permission. And I thought about the moment when someone, next time, would cross this threshold. The door would not slam shut. It would open, and the truth would pour out, cold and impossible to deny. My phone vibrated once, just once, and I knew the game had begun. I was in the kitchen, spreading butter on a slice of bread, when the screen lit up. Not a text, not a call, just a short link from Maya. Live camera feed. My heart jumped into my throat. I set the knife down as if it had suddenly become dangerous. On the screen, the front porch appeared with brutal clarity. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the steps, and there, standing in the center of the frame, as if the stage had been built just for her, was Brenda Halston. She was wearing a pure white outfit. Not ivory, not cream, absolute white, the kind of color only worn by people who believe they can never be stained. Her hair was perfectly styled, fixed in place with spray, not a single strand out of line. In her hand was the familiar clipboard, the small symbol of authority she used to make others bow. Brenda looked left, looked right, saw no one. She smiled. A smug, self-satisfied smile, as if this entire neighborhood were nothing more than her private backyard. I could hear my own breathing in my ears. Fast, shallow. Maya sent one more short message. Showtime. Brenda stepped forward, stopping directly in front of the door. She glanced at the new warning sign we had posted, just for a second. Then she curled her lip in contempt. In her mind, those words were meant for weaker people, not for the HOA president, not for a Karen who was used to being indulged. She opened her purse. I saw a flash of metal. My key. The stolen key. A wave of nausea rose in my stomach, but I did not look away from the screen. The key slid into the lock. A brief pause. Then it turned. The click sounded small but sharp, cutting through the phone speaker like an opening gunshot. My hands began to shake. I leaned against the kitchen counter to keep from falling. The door opened a few inches. The darkness of the entryway revealed itself like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Brenda stepped inside, confident. No knocking, no hesitation. Her expensive leather shoe crossed the threshold of my home. And then everything happened at once. Her foot caught the fishing line. A light tug. The pin released. The spring snapped. The small shelf tipped forward. The bucket flipped over. Not a drop, not a splash. A full cascade of cobalt blue came pouring down from above. The dye covered Brenda's head and shoulders completely. The deep blue swallowed her blonde hair in a single breath. The white outfit vanished under the cold wave, replaced by a color that could not be mistaken. The clipboard slipped from her hand, papers soaking through, sticking together as living evidence. For a moment, Brenda stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth open, her brain struggling to process what had just happened. Then the scream erupted. High, piercing, like metal scraping against glass. She staggered backward, slipping on the dye pooling across the porch. Her arms flailed, sending blue droplets splattering onto the walls, onto the warning sign. The low-angle camera captured everything, every expression, every second. On the second screen, I saw my neighbor Lyle watering his plants. He stopped. The watering can fell from his hand. He stood there for several seconds, as if he had just witnessed something both terrifying and magnificent. Then he turned around, walked straight back into his house, and closed the door. Slowly, decisively, Brenda looked up. Her eyes finally locked onto the camera mounted above the door. The tiny red light was glowing, recording. In that instant, her rage dissolved, replaced by panic. She knew. She understood. "You will regret this," Brenda screamed, pointing at the camera. Her voice was hoarse, twisted. "You will pay for this." She turned and fled, leaving a trail of dark blue footprints down the walkway. Each step was a mark of humiliation that could not be erased. She got into her car, smearing blue across the door handle and the light-colored leather seat, then sped away with tires squealing. I slid down into a chair. A laugh tore out of my chest, deep and uncontrollable. Tears spilled over, and I could not tell whether they came from tension or relief. Maya stepped out of her office, phone in hand, a rare wide smile on her face. "It is saved," she said, "from every angle. And it is already spreading through the neighborhood group." Victory surged through me, warm and intoxicating. But when I replayed the final moment, the look in Brenda's eyes before she got into the car, I felt something else. Not fear, not regret, pure hatred. I knew then that I had not just exposed a Karen in a typical HOA Karen story. I had struck her ego, and people who are used to standing at the top, when dragged into the light, do not stop easily. The storm had only just begun. The next morning, a thick envelope slid through the mail slot, like a declaration of war. I had not even picked it up when Maya's phone began vibrating nonstop, the screen lighting up with notifications from the neighborhood group. The video of Brenda being drenched in blue had spread like wildfire. I opened the envelope. Papers spilled onto the table, stacked with a precision that felt almost cruel. First violation, staining the exterior facade. Second violation, creating a hazardous condition on a common walkway. Third violation, harassment of a board member. The total amount sat at the bottom of the page, cold and emotionless. I laughed, but the sound never reached my eyes. This was not a knee-jerk reaction. This was retaliation. Carefully, prepared. Maya stood behind me, reading every line. I could feel the tension in her shoulders. "She is using HOA money to attack us," Maya said evenly, though I knew she was angry. "Paperwork. Procedures. She wants to bury us in this." I folded the stack of notices. I had been underestimated my entire life. The carpenter on the corner. People thought I only knew how to swing a hammer. They did not know I could read contracts. They did not know I understood the power of every word when words are used as weapons. By evening, I thought it might stop there. I was wrong. Night fell fast and heavy. We were eating dinner when the house suddenly dropped into complete darkness. No bang. No warning. Just lights cutting out. The refrigerator going silent. The television turning black. The silence slammed down, heavy as stone. "Only us," Maya said, already standing before I could ask. The hallway lit up with emergency lighting. The backup generator hummed to life, steadying the breath of the house. I stood still for a few seconds, feeling my heart pound. What if we did not have this? What if it were winter? Maya was already in her office, fingers moving across the keyboard. The power line was disconnected at the street box, she said. Someone had to open the box and pull the breaker. This was not an accident. The next morning, I called the power company. The cheerful voice on the other end felt almost mocking. The representative confirmed there was a work order to disconnect service at my address, submitted by the property management company, the HOA. When I asked who authorized it, she paused for a moment, then read out a familiar name, Brenda Halston. I ended the call. My hand clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was no longer a power play. This was dangerous. Cutting power in the middle of the night was not a warning shot. It was a threat. Maya moved immediately. She locked down our utility accounts, requiring in-person verification for any changes. She documented everything. Screenshots, logs, notes. She collected every piece of evidence like kindling for a much larger fire. But Brenda was not finished. The following night, just as we sat down to watch a movie, the internet slowed, then cut out completely. The buffering icon froze on the screen, almost taunting us. Maya jumped to her feet. "Not the provider," she said. "We are being jammed." She grabbed a handheld device that no outsider would ever guess the purpose of. The signal spiked as she stepped onto the porch. "Outside," she said quietly. We walked into the darkness. The night air was biting cold. In the flower bed, near the base of a bush, a small black box with a blinking red light revealed itself. A signal jammer. Not a toy, not something bought casually. I crouched down, put on gloves, and recorded everything. Every second was captured, every detail preserved. Then I heard footsteps in the distance. A figure appeared under the streetlight. Large, broad-shouldered, head shaved close. A jacket with a repair service logo stitched across the chest. He stopped at the edge of the yard, a thin smile on his face. "I am here to inspect illegal modifications," he said, his voice low and rough. "The HOA president sent me." "It is past hours," I replied, "and this is private property. Leave." He laughed and stepped closer. "I have authorization." I moved in front of Maya, heat rushing through my chest. Behind me, I heard the soft metallic sound of movement. Maya had taken hold of the emergency firearm, not aiming it, just enough for the sound to carry through the night. He froze. His eyes flicked from me to Maya. Then he stepped back. "This is not over," he said, his voice thick with threat. He turned and walked away, leaving behind the smell of machine oil and a promise that hung in the air. As his figure disappeared, a cold truth settled in. Brenda had gone further than I ever expected. She did not just want to punish me. She wanted to scare me. She wanted me to retreat. She wanted me to abandon my own territory. I looked at the house, running on generator power, the lights steady and strong. I thought about the neighbors who had stayed silent for years. I thought about being underestimated, and about the power that comes from preparation. Maya placed her hand on my shoulder. "There is no turning back now," she said. I nodded. Deep down, I felt a strange calm. When someone pushes you to the edge, you have two choices: fall or stand firm, look straight ahead, and begin the counterattack. I was still gripping the flashlight when Maya said something that made the air go solid. "They are not here to scare us anymore," she said. "They are testing how much we can take." The words came slowly, but their weight slammed into my chest. I looked out toward the street in front of the house, where the streetlights stretched out like a fragile boundary between order and chaos. The large man had just left, leaving behind a threat that hung in the air. No paperwork, no signatures, just the mass of his body and the confidence of someone who believed he was protected. We went back inside and locked the door, but neither of us mentioned sleep. Maya sat down at her desk, her fingers moving faster than usual. I recognized the sign. When she goes quiet and focused like that, the outside world is being broken down into cold pieces of data. We are being attacked in layers, she said after a moment. Fines, power shutoffs, network interference, now direct intimidation. This is not random. This is a campaign. I sat across from her and listened. In that moment, I was no longer an angry carpenter. I was someone who needed to understand the map of this war. If they can cut the power and jam the network, I said, then they can blind our cameras too. Maya nodded. Exactly. And that is the biggest problem. Our current system is good enough to catch a careless intruder, but not someone who knows what they are doing. She turned the screen toward me. A new diagram appeared, lines layered and more complex than before. We need a ghost network, she said. One that does not rely on the power grid. One that does not rely on the neighborhood internet. A system that can stand on its own. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a military base. Maya smiled for the first time that night. Yes, she said. But the home version. Over the next 2 days, our house turned into a silent construction zone. Packages arrived steadily. Small, discreet. Cameras with their own cellular signals and independent batteries. Storage devices isolated from external networks. I climbed into the attic, sweat running down my back, installing a camera with a clear view of the entire street. I placed another inside a piece of yard decor so harmless looking it was almost ridiculous. Maya built what she called the shadow network, an encrypted internal system that could sustain itself even if everything else went down. Watching her work, I realized something. Brenda and the HOA board underestimated us not because we were weak, but because they did not understand what quiet power looks like. When the new defensive layer was complete, we sat down, exhausted but alert. I asked the question that had been in my head since the man appeared. Why is she pushing this far? What does she want? Maya did not answer right away. She looked at the camera feed, where the house appeared almost peacefully staged. She thinks you are hiding something, she said. The garage, the house, power. People like Brenda cannot stand the idea that something exists outside their control. The idea struck me clean and sharp. Then we give her something to want. The plan came together without many words. A lure, not violence, not a direct confrontation. A quiet invitation to greed and obsession. I went out and bought a cheap, safe, heavy, and official looking. I carried it into the garage in daylight, deliberately leaving the door open. I moved slowly, enough for anyone watching to notice. I put a few meaningless items inside to create weight and noise. Then, I placed the most important piece inside the lining. A small tracking device, silent and patient. Maya configured it in minutes. When it leaves here, she said, we will know where it goes. No guessing, no assumptions, just truth. That evening, I ran into Lyle by the fence. I made small talk, acted tired. I casually mentioned having to keep important things at home because of everything going on. I saw his eyes widen, then he nodded quickly. I knew that information would not stay quiet. When I went back inside, Maya looked at me. Concern and resolve mixed in her eyes. If this plan works, she said, we will not just protect ourselves. We will pull her into the light. I looked at the safe sitting motionless in the garage, an inanimate object, yet carrying a challenge inside it. I knew I was stepping deeper into danger, but this time, I did not feel hunted. I felt like I was leading. Our car turned off the main road in complete silence. And for the first time, since everything began, my hands were sweating not from anger, but from anticipation. We had waved to neighbors, smiled, pretended we were leaving for a normal evening, while in reality every sense was stretched tight to the point of pain. Is the back door locked? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Locked, Maya replied, her eyes never leaving the tablet on her lap. 4 angle cameras are live, battery full, signal stable. We parked on a parallel street, where we could see the faint glow of Larkspur Ridge through the trees. Our house sat there, quiet and obedient, like a perfect piece of bait. I hated the feeling, hated leaving my home empty, but I understood that some truths only surface when you are not standing in the doorway. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing happened. My heartbeat began to slow, and a foolish voice in my head whispered that maybe Brenda had stopped. Maybe she had realized she had gone too far. "Do not," Maya said, as if reading my thoughts. "People like her do not quit. They just change tactics." And right then, the camera feed trembled slightly. A dark-colored vehicle, no logo, no obvious markings, rolled slowly into the neighborhood. Lights off, engine silent. I held my breath. "We have company," Maya said, her voice suddenly sharp. The car door slid open. A large figure stepped out. Heavy gait, familiar build. I recognized him even though the camera only captured a blurred image under the streetlight. Rocco. He scanned the area, more cautious than before. No smile, no overconfidence. This was someone here to work, not to intimidate. He moved toward the back of the house. The camera, hidden in the yard decoration, captured every step. I clenched my fist. Maya zoomed in. He crouched and pulled out a metal tool. The kitchen window trembled, a small, dry prying sound. I felt my jaw tighten. Then he disappeared inside. Everything happened too fast for me to react. I just sat there, watching my home being violated through the screen, helplessness rising like a wave. Maya placed her hand firmly over mine. "We need this," she said. "Let him do it. 5 minutes. As long as an hour." The interior camera showed Rocco moving through the garage. His flashlight swept across the shelves. Then he stopped. In front of the safe. He tried to lift it, muttered a curse, then laughed. A greedy laugh. Like someone who had just found buried treasure. He dragged the safe out inch by inch, sweat visible on his forehead through the low-angle camera. The back door opened. He hauled the safe across the yard and loaded it into the vehicle. The door slammed shut. The car pulled away, faster than it had arrived. I leaned forward toward the steering wheel. But Maya lifted the tablet in front of me. On the screen was a map. A small green dot was blinking. "Got him," she said. There was no excitement in her voice, only cold confirmation. "The tracker is active." We sat there in the darkness, watching the dot move away from the neighborhood. It turned left, turned right, traveled farther from the house. I had poured so much of myself into building, but this time, I did not feel loss. I felt like I was holding an invisible thread leading straight into the center of a dirty network. "We are not following," Maya said, as I shifted again. "We do not need to. It will take us where we need to go." That night, we did not sleep. We returned home once everything had settled, checked every corner, every scrape. The house was still standing, breached but not broken. Maya set up a large screen in her office, where the map was clearly displayed. The green dot finally stopped at an aging commercial strip, where neon lights flickered and shops only opened after dark. I read the name that appeared on the screen. A pawn shop. A slow smile spread across my face. Not from joy, but from recognition. Everything fit. Rocco was not the brain. He was just the muscle, and that muscle had just pointed directly to the one pulling the strings. Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "we go there, but not as victims. We go as people who know exactly what they are looking for." I looked at the house through the window, darkness wrapped around it but no longer threatening. Brenda thought I was just a carpenter, keeping valuables in his garage. Someone easy to break if pressed hard enough. She did not know that every step she took, every move she thought was clever, was being recorded. Not by HOA rules, but by the patience and preparation of people pushed into a corner. That night, I understood one thing clearly. When the predator takes the bait, the hunt reverses. We stood in front of the pawn shop while the sky was still dim, and for the first time, I saw Maya pause to take a breath before walking inside. Not out of fear, but because she knew that once we crossed this door, every assumption would be stripped away. The old sign rattled softly in the morning wind. The metal door rolled open, and the smell of dust and aged metal spilled out like a confession. The man behind the counter looked up, eyes sharp with the caution of someone who trades in unfinished stories. I smiled, the polite smile of an ordinary customer. Maya placed the tablet on the counter, her hand steady, like setting down a final chess piece. "We are here about a safe," I said. "Black, heavy, brought in last night." The man shook his head on instinct. "I do not know what you are talking about." Maya tapped the screen. The video played. Rocco appeared clearly, his face exposed under the security camera lights, sweaty and rushed. The footage showed him dragging the safe across the yard, loading it into the vehicle, closing the door. Then the map appeared, a blinking green dot stopping exactly where we were standing. The air shifted. The man's shoulders slumped. A moment of silence passed, heavy as lead. "Follow me," he said quietly. The safe sat in the back room, beside items without names. I placed my hand on the cold metal surface. A strange feeling. What I wanted was not inside. What I needed was the path it had revealed. Maya requested a backup of the transaction cameras. The man nodded, surprisingly quick. When the hard drive was placed on the counter, I knew we had Rocco. But Rocco was only the arm. We needed the brain. On the drive home, Maya replayed the blue dye incident. She slowed it down, very slowly. "Look at this," she said. The frame froze at the exact moment the dye burst like a cruel flower. On the edge of the leather notebook Brenda was holding, a splash of blue had landed, forming a small, unique star shape. Not a smear, a mark. Maya did not stop there. She opened the HOA social media page, scrolled, paused. A photo from a charity event a few days later. Brenda stood smiling at the camera. The outfit had changed, but the notebook was still in her hand. In the lower corner, that blue mark was still there. Faded, but unmistakable. A fingerprint of truth. I leaned back in the seat and exhaled. "She kept it," I said, "because she thought no one would dare look closely enough." Maya nodded. "And because she believed this would just be another loud Karen stories moment that would eventually fade away." We were not done. That afternoon, I knocked on doors. At first, people avoided me. Eyes turned away. Doors opened only a crack. I did not blame them. Fear had been taught for too long. But when I talked about the key, about the power shutoff, about Rocco, one door opened wider. Then, another. The elderly woman at the end of the street held the paper with trembling hands, describing the attic inspection. Rocco had come alone, left with a large cash invoice. A young couple spoke about unreasonable fines. A middle-aged man described whispered threats. Each piece fell into place. No one raised their voice, but everyone told the truth. We collected statements, signatures, dates, photos, files. There were no impulsive emotions, only order. Watching Maya work, I understood why people always underestimated her. Real power does not need noise. That evening, we laid everything out on the table. The break-in footage, the tracking data, pawn shop cameras, the blue mark on the notebook, the testimonies, a clear map of abuse. I looked at the stack of evidence, feeling both weighed down and unburdened. "We could turn this over to the police," I said. Maya shook her head. "We will, but not yet. If this is only a criminal case, it will drag on. And during that time, she will still be sitting in that chair." She pulled out an old document. HOA bylaws. She flipped to a clause covered in dust. Emergency removal procedures. All it took was signatures from 1/4 of the residents. I let out a quiet laugh. Not from joy, but from realizing what Brenda had missed. Her power was built on silence, and silence, once broken, never returns intact. I thought about the looks in my neighbors' eyes as they signed. Fear was still there, but beneath it was something else. Light, warm, hope. As night fell, I stood on the porch, looking down the quiet street. I had been underestimated. A carpenter, a man pushing back against the HOA. But I knew exactly what I was holding. Not power on paper, but truth, recorded, shared, and ready to step into the light. The game was not over. But from this moment on, it was no longer a protected Karen hunting in the shadows. It had become a confrontation she could no longer avoid. Cheers erupted at the exact moment. 4 paint buckets tipped at once. The sky did not fall. Fake power did. That afternoon, the neighborhood wore a festival mask. Balloons. Grills. The light scent of meat on the fire mixed with children's laughter. But beneath the surface, a tense current ran quietly. Something everyone could feel. 10 days since the chaotic meeting. 10 days with Brenda's threats hanging like a blade. I stood by the grill, turning each piece of meat, feeling like I was counting my own heartbeats. Under the table, my hand rested on a small red button. Maya was inside, in front of the screens, her voice barely audible in my earpiece. All cameras are live. Signal is stable. The drone is in position. Brenda arrived right on time. Not alone, Rocco on her left. Cal and Monica close behind. They moved through the crowd like a formation, eyes scanning faces and ballots. Threats slipped from the corners of their mouths. Just enough to plant fear. I saw the elderly woman at the end of the street clutch her ballot. Her hands shook. Then she lifted her head, her gaze steadier than I expected. She cast her vote. Someone else followed. Then another. The silence that had fed Brenda for years began to crack. Brenda slammed her hand on the ballot table. Her voice went sharp as she declared the vote invalid. Rocco stepped forward 1 pace. Just 1. The air locked tight. Maya's voice came through my earpiece. That is enough. I pressed the button. 4 mechanisms released at once. 4 buckets tipped. 20 gallons of cobalt dye poured down like a punishing rain. Brenda did not have time to look up. Rocco did not have time to move. Cal and Monica froze. In a single breath, they became deep blue statues at the center of the neighborhood. A hush fell. Then laughter exploded. Not mockery, but release. Years of forced silence breaking loose. Dye pooled on the ground. Blue marks, stamped shoes, hands. Proof of a truth that could no longer be denied. 2 police cars rolled into the neighborhood, smooth as if expected. Detective Harmon stepped out, his eyes sweeping the scene before stopping on me. I handed him the storage drive. My voice was calm in a way that surprised even me. Everything is here. Break-in footage. Fraudulent power shutoff. Signal jamming. Coercion. Pawn shop transactions. Notarized statements. Harmon nodded and signaled. Handcuffs closed around Brenda's blue-stained wrists. She turned to look at me. No fear, no regret, only raw hatred. But this time, her gaze carried no power. The vote resumed, nearly unanimous. The old board was removed. A temporary board was formed. My name was called. I shook my head on instinct, then looked around at the faces. I understood, not because I wanted power, but because they wanted someone who had stood up. The months that followed moved slowly and solidly. Fines were revoked. Money was returned. Doors opened more easily. Neighbors greeted each other by name. Shared meals appeared like grass after rain. Fear retreated, making room for something long forgotten. Trust. Rocco cooperated. Cal and Monica faced accountability. Brenda received her sentence and a long-term ban from serving on any board. The neighborhood let out a long breath. One late afternoon, I pulled the mail from the box. My fingers touched something sticky. I looked down. A thin streak of cobalt. On it, a small, clear fingerprint. Not mine. Not Rocco's. Brenda was under supervision. Maya was already at her desk when I stepped inside. She did not need to ask. She pulled up the mailbox camera, slowed the footage, stopped on the exact frame. It was placed, she said. Not accidental. I looked out at the quiet street, where small blue symbols had begun appearing, near porches like a silent promise. We had won a battle. We were keeping the peace. But someone wanted to remind us, the story was not finished. If you think you know whose fingerprint that is, leave a comment. If you want to follow the next chapter of this story, like and subscribe so you do not miss it. Some battles do not begin with gunfire. We can see battles, and some victories only matter when they are told, so others know that silence is not destiny.